Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and we are here today with a video that is, quite frankly, long overdue. Today, we are finally going to properly get into the basics of combat in Savage Worlds. So, as you can see, I've got my little setup here on Roll20, just a basic little battle map. We've got our group of people, our central characters in the middle here, Walter Dickinson, the snake oil salesman that we made in the previous video, Delilah McCoy, a gunslinger, and a native shaman, Heavy Paws. And they're in a situation where they were staying in some small way station, a small inn along the road on the way to whatever major city or major location it was next, when some evil force turned all the residents inside into zombies. Now, before we get started on this proper, there are a few things that we need to delineate before combat can begin in full. And the first thing is we need to delineate the difference between the kinds of characters that there are in the game. Savage Worlds has two kinds of characters in the game. There are wild cards, which all of your player characters will represent. And there are extras, which are usually your enemies, NPCs, any character that your characters can encounter that does not have particular importance, such as a basic zombie, as is the case right now, would be considered an extra. However, there are enemies and NPCs they can run into that are considered wild cards. And within the books, enemies and NPCs, particularly enemies that they can run into, have encounters with that are wild cards, will be delineated as such with a special symbol. In Deadlands, I do believe it is the picture of a sheriff's badge next to their name. Now, what's the difference between a wild card and an extra? Well, for the sake of combat, the real key difference between a wild card and an extra is the fact that wild cards are able to take 3 wounds of damage before they die, whereas an extra dies after taking 1 wound. They are your fodder. They are the enemies that you're meant to take out quickly and also fight in big groups. Extras, by and large, tend to be weaker than wild card characters in terms of their stats. So generally speaking, when you're facing groups of extras, you're going to be facing sizable groups, and it's really the numbers that tend to make them more of a threat. This isn't always the case, whereas wild cards tend to be a bigger threat on their own. Now, something else we need to delineate is the use of bennies, or in the case of, in the case of Deadlands, which is the setting we are using, fate chips. And these are essentially special rerolls that you get. You can spend one of these to get the ability to reroll a die that you failed, for example. You can also spend these to what they call soak wounds, which is to say if you get wounded in combat, you can spend one of your fate chips to I don't even know what that word would be, to negate the wound, excuse me. Now, we're not going to actually go into how fate chips specifically and bennies work in this video. We're going to save that for the next video when we get into some of the more advanced things in combat. For this video, we're going to be sticking with the basics. We're going to go over how initiative works. We're going to go over some tips with handling initiative, because initiative can be a little bit tricky in Savage Worlds since you're usually dealing with large numbers of enemies. After all, the game is meant to be fast-paced and kind of feel like you're playing in an action movie, so you're usually going to be dealing with sizable groups of enemies. So we'll be dealing with initiative, tips on handling initiative. We'll go over how to make attacks. We will go over how to make specifically the differences between making ranged and melee attacks. We will go over how to deal damage, the effects of damage, what happens when you critically succeed, and what happens when you critically fail. So without any further ado, let's continue. So initiative in Savage Worlds is not actually dealt with die the way it is in many other tabletop RPGs, but rather with a deck of playing cards. And you're going to want a full standard playing card deck to deal your initiative, and that is going to include the 2 jokers. The reason for this is the suits plus the number are going to determine what order in the initiative you go. So from 2 through king, that is your range numerically. Someone who has a 2 is almost always going to go after someone who has a king. However, because you've got 4 suits of matching cards, if you were to draw a matching card, let's say that, for example, Heavy Paws and Delilah both drew an 8. Well, then, at that point, you're going to have to go by the suit. And the suit is determined in descending alphabetical order, which means spades are the fastest, followed then by hearts, then by diamonds, and lastly by clubs. So let's say that Delilah draws the 8 of hearts, and Heavy Paws draws the 8 of diamonds. That means Delilah will go before Heavy Paws because hearts comes after diamonds in the alphabetical order. Last of all, it comes the Joker, and the Joker is the most powerful card you can draw because not only does it allow you to select when you go, you are floating out of the turn order when you have the Joker. You decide when you slot yourself in, and you can slot yourself in a way that interrupts your enemies. And I want to make this clear. That counts for the keeper as well. If the keeper draws the Joker for one of the enemies that they're putting against the player, they can slot their enemy's action in to interrupt a player's turn. So it's powerful in that sense. But the real strength of the Joker comes from the fact that when you draw the Joker, you gain a +2 to every roll you make. A +2 bonus to every roll you make, mixed along with the ability to slot yourself and interrupt the action of anyone you choose, choosing when exactly you go. Incredibly powerful. So we've got our turn order here. We've got our main characters here. We've got our zombies on the outside. And here we have our virtual deck of cards. Now, one small tip for initiative for game masters. The game suggests, because you are usually dealing with sizable groups of enemies, one suggestion that Savage World makes that I strongly agree with is actually, instead of rolling, or rather drawing initiative for each individual enemy when you have larger groups like this, as you can see, we've got 7 zombies here against 3 players. That's going to be a lot of individual turns being taken. To speed things up, group the enemies into a single initiative. Now, when I did this originally, when I tried to actually make this a proper mock combat video, excuse me, I had separated it into a group of 3 and into a group of 4. But since this is just going to be a simple demonstration of how initiative is calculated, we've got our 4 characters, and then we're using the zombie dog here to represent the zombies. So let's draw for Delilah. Delilah draws the 9 of spades. So we'll go ahead and put 9, S for spade. We move on to Walter Dickinson, our snake oil salesman. Walter draws the 7 of hearts. It's a little bit slow today. Finally, Heavy Paws. He draws the 8 of diamonds. And the zombies draw the Jack of diamonds. So in this case, which the Jack will count as 11 because it's the 11th card on the suit, so that this can read it more easily. Then we go descending order. The zombies would go first, followed by Delilah, Heavy Paws, and then Walter. So now that we have our initiative figured out, we can begin with combat. So let's go through a couple of simple demonstrations on how combat works, how you make attack rolls, ranged versus melee, what happens when you get wounded, what happens when you critically succeed, and so on. Okay, so as you can see here, we've changed our battle map slightly to reflect a couple of turns having gone by. Heavy Paws is now engaged in melee combat with 2 different zombies, whereas Walter and Delilah have taken some cover behind their table to try and pick off the zombies that are approaching them from the other side. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by showcasing how to make ranged attacks with Delilah. So Delilah is equipped with the Lamat Carbine, one of the weapons that is exclusive to Deadlands. And Lamat Carbine, we're going to go over the stats of how to read the stats of a ranged weapon very briefly. You have range increments of 20 squares, 40 squares, and 80 squares. That's your point blank, medium, and long ranges. A rate of fire of 1. That means you can fire once per turn before you have to reload and shoot again. You've got the caliber type of bullet that you need to purchase for it, which is .42 caliber rifle. The damage is 2d8. It has 9 shots before you have to reload. Again, you can only shoot once per turn, but you have 9 shots before you have to reload. And it has an AP score of 1. Now, AP is something important to note. AP stands for armor piercing, and what that's going to do is that's going to affect your enemy's toughness when you hit them. The goal with combat is you want to hit a target number to deal damage, or to have the opportunity to deal damage rather, and then you want to roll your damage to try and exceed the enemy's toughness. If you succeed in beating the enemy's toughness, you deal damage. Weapons that have armor piercing effectively reduce the enemy's toughness by the amount equal to the armor piercing value. In the case of the Lamat Carbine, it's 1. So ranged attacks need to hit a target number of 4. It doesn't matter what the enemy is, ranged attacks are always going for the target number of 4. So let's say Delilah makes her ranged attack. She has a D10 in shooting, and that's the skill she's going to use. When you're making ranged attacks, you want to use your shooting skill if you're using a gun, a bow, anything like that. Or if you're using something like a throwing axe, a throwing knife, throwing a spear, throwing a grenade even, you use the throwing skill. Delilah has a D10 in the shooting skill, so she rolls a D10. She gets a 6, which beats the target number of 4. Now, the thing is, Delilah beat the target number of 4 standard. There's another thing that you're going to look for when you're rolling target numbers. You're going to see if you succeed or you raise. Now, a simple success is a roll of equal to or 3 over your target number. So if Delilah had rolled between 4 and 7, she would have succeeded. She would have hit the zombie, and it would have incurred the staggered condition. We'll go into the conditions after we talk about this whole thing here and go over exactly how the rolls work and how to determine successes versus raises. So she succeeds. She exceeded the target number of 4 by 2. She rolled a 6. So she succeeds, which means the zombie that she targeted is now staggered. Well, if she deals the proper damage, excuse me, the zombie will be staggered. Now, zombies have a toughness of 6. They're a little bit stronger than your average enemy because of the fact that, they are undead. It's one of their abilities. However, Delilah's armor-piercing value with her gun is 1. So that toughness is now lowered to 5. With 2d8, she needs to exceed 5 in order to deal damage. So she rolls the 2d8, she rolls a 2, and she rolls a 5. It's a total of 7. So she succeeds. She exceeds the target's damage. Now, since she exceeded the target's threshold, again, only by 2, that's a simple success. So the target is now staggered. If she had raised, that simple success would have become a wound. And you raise any time you beat your target number by 4. So, if Delilah had raised with her attack, let's say that she was trying to hit the zombie, she rolls a 9. That exceeds the target number of 4 by 5, which means she raised by 1. Since she raised, she now adds an extra damage die onto her attack. So, instead of 2d8, she now rolls 3d8 with her gun. So she rolls 3d8. She's trying to beat the target's toughness of 5. She rolls 11. So she raises by 1 over the target's toughness. She needed a 9 to raise there. She rolled 11. She raised by 1. Every 4 points that you exceed the target number you're trying to hit counts as a raise. And every raise increases the effectiveness of what you're doing by 1 stage. In the case of dealing damage, when you raise, you go from causing the target to become shaken to causing them to take a wound. And every subsequent raise adds another wound. So Delilah, because she raised when she critically hit, she rolled an 11, she needed a 5, has now dealt the zombie 1 wound. The zombie is now dead because zombies are extras. They can only take 1 wound. So that's what happens when you critically succeed. Let's take a look now at what happens if you critically fail, and then we'll take a look at how to handle melee combat. Alright, as you can see, we've made some slight changes to represent an advance in combat once more. Delilah has been putting her work in. She's taken down 2 of the zombies, and Heavy Paws has taken one for 2 that he's been fighting on her own. Delilah finds herself in a pretty good situation because she's kept her position of cover, which has made it more difficult for the zombies to get around, although they are starting to get close. Walter, unfortunately, made the mistake of trying to move to what he thought was a better position, and now, well, he's stuck in a corner with a zombie on his ass. And so, we're going to look now at what happens with critical failures. Now, to do critical failures, we're going to have to introduce a new concept, and this is a concept exclusive to wildcard characters called the wild die. The wild die is an extra d6 that you roll alongside any other skill die or trait die that you use. So basically, any roll you make that is not a damage roll, as a player character, you include an extra d6 as the wild die. The way the wild die works is it's basically supposed to represent fate's favor, or sometimes fate's lack of favor. Because the wild die is there so that you basically have a second chance to succeed on a roll, potentially, even if you roll really badly. So, let's say, for example, that Walter Dickinson is trying to take a shot at this zombie before he moves away. So let's just do a basic example of the wild die first. His shooting skill is only a d6. His thing is more about the social game, talking people down, taunting people, getting people to do things the way he wants with his slick tongue and silvered words. So, he takes a shot at the zombie. He rolls a 2 on his shooting die, but he rolls a 4 on his wild die. Remember, when shooting, even when shooting in melee, your target number is 4. So because he rolls a 4 on that d6 wild die, he still succeeds. He still hits the zombie. Now, let's say he rolls his damage. He's just got a basic revolver. I can't remember off the top of my head what the damage of most of the revolvers is, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, because usually rifles deal d8s in damage, revolvers, I believe, usually dealt d6s, so let's just say the revolver deals 2d6 damage. He rolls a 1 and a 2. He only does 3 damage, not enough to beat the zombie's toughness of 6. So he succeeds, he hits the zombie, but it does not deal any significant damage. The turn order goes around, everyone else takes their actions, the zombie takes a swing at him and misses, lucky for him, so he loads up and he takes another shot. He rolls his standard die, he gets a 1. He rolls his wild die, he gets a 1. This is Snake Eyes. Any time that you roll a 1 on both your trait die and your wild die, you hit Snake Eyes, which means your ability critically failed. And the thing that's particularly nasty about critical failures, it's the GM that gets to decide what exactly goes wrong. So in this case, because Walter was attempting to take a shot at his enemy, he loads the gun up quick, he aims, he fires, his gun jams. Walter's gun is now considered broken until he can fix the jam. He is without his primary weapon. That is the result, in this case, of his critical failure. So again, wild die characters, they get access to an extra dice they roll anytime they're making a trait check. Trait checks being skill challenges, ability challenges, so on and so forth. Anytime that you would roll a die for one of your skills or one of your main attributes, roll an extra d6 with it. That's the wild die. And then you take whichever number is better. And the wild die functions in every way like whatever trait die it is you're rolling. So let's say you're rolling a skill that you're not trained in, which recall, a skill you're not trained in, you roll a 1d4 minus 2. Your wild die also incurs this minus 2 penalty. Functions in every way the same, which means if you roll a 6 on the wild die, you also ace. which means that you get to roll the die again, you get to add the damage again. And that's something we haven't touched on yet. And that's something we're going to touch on in just a moment when we go into melee combat. And we're back once more. Battlefield has changed again. Thanks to some good work from Heavy Paws, another zombie has been taken down. Delilah has been forced back a little bit further, and Walter has been forced over here. He did end up taking a hit from the zombie. He is shaken. He's pulled himself a little ways out of combat and allowed the zombie to become distracted by Heavy Paws, who is now going to take an attack at it. Now, melee attacks work a little bit differently from ranged attacks. When you attack in melee, you're not going after a target number of 4. Instead, you are looking to exceed your target's parry score. Your parry score, if I remember correctly, is equal to 2 plus half of your fighting die total. So, because Heavy Paws fights in melee a lot, he's got a d10 fighting die. So his parry score is equal to 7. 2 plus half of his fighting die. Half of 10 is 5. 7. Zombies have a parry of 5. They fight in melee entirely. However, they are mindless. They are pure brute strength. They flail, they claw, they bite. They don't really fight with any sort of finesse or particular skill. So Heavy Paws attempts to attack the zombie in the green dress that was chasing Walter Dickinson. He takes a swing with his tomahawk. He rolls his fighting die. He has a d10. He rolls the fighting die. He rolls the wild die. He rolls a 3 on the fighting die. That is not enough to beat the parry of 5, but he lucks out. He rolls a 6 on the wild die. Not only does that beat the parry of 5, but he has just rolled max number on the die. That means he aces. When you ace, you roll the die again, and you add that to the previous total. So he rolls another 6, he gets a 5. He now has made a fighting roll of 11. He has succeeded and raised the zombie. Remember, when you make an attack roll and you raise, you add 1 more to the damage die of your weapon. Now, Heavy Paws is not using a gun, which means he's not just going to add a simple d8 or a simple d6. He is using a tomahawk. Melee weapons have an effect where they have the die that you add, the die that you roll for the weapon, plus your strength die. So when you ace on an attack roll, what do? Do you add an extra weapon die? Do you add an extra strength die? Well, the answer is weapon die. Anytime you ace with an attack, you are adding your weapon die an extra time. So, Heavy Paw aced with his attack roll. He gets an extra weapon die to go with his attack. He has a strength currently of d8. The tomahawk deals a d6 in damage. So he rolls 1d6 plus 1d8 normally. However, he aced. So he adds 1 more d6 to that roll because he gets the extra damage from his critically successful attack. So his total damage is going to be 2d6 plus 1d8 against the zombie's toughness of 6. So he rolls the first d6. He's not lucky. He rolls a 1. He rolls the second d6. He's a lot luckier because he rolls a 6. And he rolls the d8. He rolls a 3. So in total, he has rolled 10. However, yet again, he rolled a 6 on that second d6. He aced again. Any die that you roll can ace. And anytime that die aces, you roll again. So he rolls another d6. He gets very lucky. He rolls another 6. The dice aces a second time. So he rolls a third d6. He rolls a 3. So now you have, from the first d6, a 1. From the second d6, a 6. From that ace, another 6. And then from that, another 3. So now you have 16 damage just from those 2 aces on the weapon alone and that ace from the very successful attack, plus the 5 you rolled on the d8. So his total damage is 21, far exceeding the zombie's toughness of 6. In fact, Heavy Paws raised 3 times. Heavy Paws raised 3 times, which means if this zombie were a wild card character that he had successfully hit, he would have immediately dealt 3 wounds to that character, killing them instantly. So Heavy Paws, because of his powerful attack, splatters the zombie's head. It falls backwards. It is dead. Now we're going to go through one last bit of combat in here, one last bit to go over, and that is the effects of being shaken and taking wounds. So we've got our final adjustment to the battlefield here. 5 of the 7 zombies are dead, but the last 2 have finally reached Delilah's position, and they are attacking. So the first one takes a swing, and he successfully hits and exceeds Delilah's toughness. So Delilah now enters the shaken status. A shaken character has taken the first step towards taking damage. Shaken characters can only take free actions in their round. They cannot move, they cannot attack. They can only take free actions, things like calling out to other players, asking for assistance, so on and so forth. Now, to recover from shaken status, you need to make a spirit roll. And again, you're looking for that target number, that magical target number of 4. Now, Delilah's spirit is, it's okay. It's a d8. It's a little bit higher than the average. So she has a 50-50 chance of succeeding on this spirit roll. But don't forget, she gets that wild die too. So, normally, when you roll a spirit roll, you've got your 3 standard options. You've got failure, which means that you're still shaken. You've got a success. If you succeed on a spirit roll, which is, again, equal to or 3 over your target number. So if Delilah rolls a 4 through a 7 and succeeds on the spirit roll, she is no longer shaken, but for the rest of this turn can still only take free actions. If she raises the spirit roll to break out of being shaken, which is to say she rolls 8 or more, at that point, she is no longer shaken and can immediately act normally. So, Delilah, however, is not very lucky. She rolls a 3 on her 8 and a 2 on her wild die. So she is still shaken, which means now when this zombie's turn comes around again, he attacks, and we'll say he hits. He deals 1 wound to Delilah, which means Delilah now goes from having 3 wounds to 2. So, let's take a look at what happens every time you take a wound. Now, as I stated earlier, taking wounds is what starts you dying in this game. That is how you are dealt damage. Every wildcard character, can take 3 wounds. Every extra can take 1 before they die. Now, for the wildcard characters that can take 3 wounds, they do incur penalties when they take wounds as well. As a matter of fact, wound penalties are cumulative. That means for each wound you get another stack of these penalties. And believe me, these are penalties you want to try your hardest to avoid, because every wound you get causes you to suffer a -1 cumulative penalty to your pace, which is how quick you can move, down to a minimum of 1, and every further trait test you make, up to the maximum of 3 wounds. Remember, at 3 wounds, you die. A hero with 2 wounds, for example, will suffer a -2 penalty to their pace, so they will move 2 squares lower per turn, as well as a -2 penalty to all of their trait tests. That means anytime you need to make an ability test, say you're in a grapple and you need to use your strength to try and break free of a pair of zombies that are latching onto you, trying to bite the hell out of you. Well, you now have, if you have 2 wounds, you have a -2 to that roll. Say you're trying to shoot the creature that's trying to kill you. You have 2 wounds, -2 to that roll. The only roll that this does not affect is damage, unless you're talking melee damage. Because, remember, melee damage is weapon damage plus strength. Strength rolls are trait tests. The strength damage will be reduced by 2 if you're attacking in melee. Well, with that all done and out of the way, folks, we have gone over the basic elements of combat in Savage Worlds. Next video, we're going to go over how to use spells. We're going to go over some of the more advanced things like using bennies, or in the case of Deadlands, the fate chips, which are a little more advanced than bennies. They function in essentially the same way, especially the basic fate chips, but there are more variations between them, and the total way they function is a little bit more advanced. So we'll go over that into detail in the next video. So we'll go over how to use spells and special powers. We'll go over how bennies and fate chips work. We will go over how to use trappings for your character's powers and what that means for you as the GM and your players in terms of customizability. And then, if we have time in that video, we will also go over how to do chase sequences in combat as well. So with all of that now said and done, friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave, and I am your man behind the screen. If you liked this video, please feel free to leave it a like, and if you would like to see more content like this, subscribe and hit that bell notification icon to get notified. So what are your thoughts on how combat functions in Savage Worlds? I had originally planned to do a mock combat, a proper mock combat for this, so that you could see turn by turn how this went, but unfortunately that just took far too long doing it by myself and explaining every little thing. Perhaps at some point soon, when I'm able to finish this and I can get a group together to actually run a game on here to showcase how everything goes, we can go over it in a little more detail then. But for now, tell me what you think. Do you think Savage Worlds is a game that you would consider checking out? It's a little bit more simplistic in some ways than your standard D20 system games, but in other ways there's actually quite a lot more depth to it than you might think. And believe me when I tell you, it is a very fast-paced and can be a very fun game to play. There's a reason why it's my favorite. So, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you'd like to see more like this. Let me know if there's anything you think I can do to make these videos a little bit better. The system showcase format is one that I'm still kind of getting a handle on, since I haven't done as many of these as I have my other videos. Next of all, I just want to remind everyone that I do have a BitChute channel open up. If you would like to follow me over there, I highly recommend it. It's a great way to get backups of my videos, and there will be exclusive content posted up there from time to time as well. Content that BitChute does consider safe for posting, that YouTube doesn't necessarily allow anymore. Also, if you want to get regular notifications, I strongly recommend following me on social media. You can find links for that in the description down below. And last, but certainly not least, I just wanted to remind everyone that I do have a Patreon page. If you like what I do and you would like to help support me financially, you can find a link for that in the description below as well. I appreciate every dollar that is sent my way, but even more than that, I just appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend this time with me, enjoying this hobby, and really sharing in my love of it and allowing me to share my love of it with you. So with all of that now said, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, role play well, game on. Have a lovely day.